What if somewhere beneath your feet, in a darkness no telescope has ever touched, a prison holds beings older than mankind itself? Enoch didn't imagine this place. He walked through it. And what he saw waiting behind those chains might explain everything happening on earth right now. Genesis tells us that in the days before the flood, the sons of God looked upon the daughters of men and saw that they were beautiful. 4 words. That's all Moses gives us. 4 words to describe an event so catastrophic that God chose to drown the entire world rather than let it continue. But Enoch, the 7th from Adam, the man who walked with God and was not, for God took him, saw far more than 4 words could ever hold. He was taken, lifted beyond the veil that separates our world from what lies underneath it. And there, in a place he could barely describe with human language, he found a prison. Not a prison built by men, not stone and iron forged by hands. This was something older, something carved into the architecture of creation itself. Enoch writes of a place where the stars and the host of heaven turned, a desolate region with no soft ground beneath his feet, no comfort in the air around him. He calls it a place of chaos and terror. And it was there, in that void between what we can see and what we were never meant to see, that he found them. Angels. Not the kind painted on chapel ceilings with harps in their hands. These were beings bound in chains, burning, waiting. The Book of Enoch names them. Watchers, 200 of them, led by a being called Semjaza, who descended onto Mount Hermon in the days of Jared, bound together by an oath. They did not fall by accident, they chose. They looked down at the daughters of men, just as Genesis says, and they made a decision that would fracture the world. Enoch 6 tells us they said to one another, "Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men and beget us children." A conspiracy formed in heaven, sealed by oath, and carried out in secret on the slopes of a mountain that still bears the memory. What came from that union wasn't ordinary. Genesis 6 calls them Nephilim, and the word itself carries the weight of something fallen, something that should not exist. Giants, beings of mixed nature, neither fully human nor fully angelic, but something in between that the earth had never held before and some believe was never designed to hold. They grew violent. Enoch describes them consuming everything, turning against mankind, against beast, against each other, until the earth itself groaned under the weight of what had been unleashed upon it. He writes that these offspring devoured the labor of men until men could not sustain them, and then they turned on the people themselves and then on one another, drinking blood and consuming flesh in a way that had never been known before that generation. The land was not simply corrupted, it was being consumed from the inside, and the cry of it, Scripture tells us, reached heaven itself. This is why Genesis says God's Spirit would not strive with man forever, why he looked at what the earth had become and felt grief in his heart over the very creation he had spoken into being. This wasn't a distant, detached judgment, it was personal. The corruption of the Nephilim bloodline threatened something far deeper than population or violence. It threatened the line through which redemption itself was meant to come. That is why the flood wasn't only punishment, it was preservation, a surgical act to protect a promise that stretched all the way forward to a manger in Bethlehem. And here is where the story turns, where most sermons stop but Enoch keeps going. God did not simply flood the earth and call it finished. He dealt with the watchers themselves directly, permanently. Enoch records the archangel Raphael being commanded, "Bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into the darkness, and cover him with darkness and let him abide there forever." Not for a season, not until he learned his lesson. Forever. The angel Michael was given a similar charge concerning Semjaza and the rest, to bind them for 70 generations underneath the earth until the day of judgment. 70 generations. Think about what that number means. If you trace it forward from the time of the flood, some who study this text believe we are approaching the edge of that number even now. The chains Enoch saw were never meant to hold forever. They were measured, timed, set to a countdown that began the moment those angels touched Mount Hermon. And this is not fringe speculation invented in a modern basement. Jude, writing under inspiration in the New Testament, references this exact event. He writes that God reserved in everlasting chains under darkness the angels who did not keep their proper domain, holding them for judgment. Peter says nearly the same thing, describing God casting these angels into Tartarus, delivering them into chains of darkness, reserved for judgment. 2 apostles, writing centuries after Enoch, confirming what he saw in that terrible star-turning place. This isn't a story that exists in isolation, tucked away in a book the church quietly set aside. It's woven through Scripture like a thread that was never meant to be pulled loose, because once you pull it, you start to see how much of the Bible actually depends on it. The garden, the flood, the giants that reappear generations later, when the spies sent into Canaan came back trembling, saying they saw the sons of Anak, and beside them felt like grasshoppers. Enoch didn't stumble into this vision by accident. He was shown it because someone needed to carry the account forward, to make sure that what happened in the unseen world would never be completely forgotten, even if it was rarely spoken of. He described the pit with its columns of fire, the 7 stars bound together like disobedient captives, the smell of a furnace that never stopped burning. He wasn't given comfort. He was given a warning. And warnings like that don't fade with time. They wait. If any part of this account stirs something in you, a recognition that these are not just ancient stories, but pieces of a much larger picture the modern church rarely touches, you need to see what else has been preserved. We put together everything the extra-biblical texts reveal about the Watchers, the Nephilim and the world before the flood into one premium illustrated guide, the Forbidden Book of Enoch. It walks you through the imagery, the names, the timeline Enoch himself laid out, with illustrations that bring this hidden history to life in a way reading alone never could. The link is pinned in the first comment below this video, and if these truths matter to you the way they've mattered to thousands of others who found this channel, that guide is where the deeper answers are waiting. And if you want to be here when we go further into what happens as that 70-generation sentence draws toward its close, make sure you're subscribed. This channel exists to bring these buried accounts back into the light, one revelation at a time, and there is far more still ahead. Enoch didn't just witness the sentencing of the Watchers from a safe distance. He was pulled into the middle of it, made a messenger between 2 worlds that were never supposed to speak to each other again. The fallen angels, chained and desperate, begged Enoch to intercede for them. They asked him to write a petition to God on their behalf, hoping that the man who walked so closely with the Almighty might carry a word of mercy back down to them. Enoch agreed. He sat by the waters of Dan, south of Hermon, and read their petition aloud until sleep overtook him, and in that sleep, visions came that no waking mind could have produced on its own. He saw himself lifted, carried past clouds, past mists, past a wall built of hailstones surrounded by tongues of fire. He entered a house built of the same fire, hot as flame and cold as ice at once, a place where no living being could stand without trembling. And beyond that house was another greater still, its floor made of fire, its pillars burning, and on a throne that Enoch could barely describe, sat the great glory. Not a metaphor, not a poetic flourish. Enoch insists this was seen, not imagined, and the terror of it drove him face down before he was told to rise. It was there, in that throne room, that Enoch received his answer for the Watchers, and it was not the answer they wanted. He was told to go back to them and declare that they would have no peace, no forgiveness, not now, not ever. You have not asked for the sake of your sons, that you should love the works of your hands. You have wept and prayed, but you shall not be able to speak one word of the writing which I have written. Isaiah gives us a parallel picture, centuries later, describing how the host of heaven will be punished in the heavens above, and the kings of the earth upon the earth gathered together as prisoners in a pit, shut up in prison, and after many days visited with judgment. The reason for this permanent verdict wasn't cruelty, it was order. Angels were created for a specific purpose, to serve, to watch, to minister, not to take wives, not to father children, not to interfere with the boundaries God had set between heaven and earth. Jude tells us plainly that these are angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, and for that abandonment of purpose, they were reserved in everlasting chains under darkness. The word Jude uses for their crime is telling. It isn't simply disobedience. It's a departure from their created role, a rebellion not of pride alone, but of desire, of wanting something that was never meant for them. Job gives us a glimpse of what these beings were originally meant to be, describing the sons of God shouting for joy when the foundations of the earth were laid. They were present at creation, witnesses to the first light, the first sea, the first breath of every living creature. That's the office these particular angels abandoned, not distant servants, but participants in the unfolding of the world itself, and their fall wasn't a quiet failure. It was a betrayal of a front-row seat to glory, traded for something the text describes almost like an addiction, a hunger they could not set aside even knowing what it would cost them. What makes this account so unsettling isn't only what the Watchers did, it's what they taught. Enoch tells us that Azazel, one of the leaders among them, taught men to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, introducing the world to the metals of war and the art of killing one another with precision. He taught women the art of deception through jewelry and cosmetics, the coloring of eyebrows, the beautifying of the face, arts that Enoch describes not as harmless vanity, but as tools that led the world further astray. Other Watchers taught the cutting of roots, the observation of stars for sorcery, the resolving of enchantments. Knowledge that should have come slowly, guided by wisdom, was poured out all at once, weaponized, and it corrupted everything it touched. This is a detail most people never hear in church, and it changes how you read the flood story entirely. It wasn't simply that people were sinning in some vague, generalized sense. Civilization itself had been hijacked. The very tools of survival, warfare, beauty, and knowledge had been handed down by beings who had no right to give them, and mankind had no framework to handle what it had been given. Genesis 6 says that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's not an accident of culture. That's the fingerprint of interference from outside the natural order, a corruption planted deliberately and allowed to spread until it consumed nearly everyone. Nearly everyone, not Noah. Genesis calls him a righteous man, perfect in his generations, a phrase some ancient readers understood as more than moral description. It may point to something about lineage itself, that Noah's bloodline had remained untouched by the corruption spreading through the rest of humanity. Whatever the fullness of that phrase means, it marks Noah as the exception in a world where exceptions had become rare. God chose him, instructed him, and gave him the task of building the ark not simply to save animals from rising water, but to preserve a remnant of humanity that hadn't been swallowed by what the Watchers unleashed. And so the flood came, not as an isolated act of divine anger, but as the final response to a crisis that had been building since the moment those angels descended on Hermon. The waters didn't just judge sin in the abstract, they erased the physical evidence of a rebellion that had merged heaven and earth in a way Scripture treats as an abomination. But erasing the evidence didn't erase the beings responsible. They remained, chained beneath the world they had corrupted, waiting through the count of 70 generations for a judgment that Enoch was told, in no uncertain terms, would eventually come. Some scholars who study Enoch's chronology point out that the number 70 wasn't chosen at random anywhere else in Scripture either. Israel's exile in Babylon lasted 70 years. The nations listed in Genesis 10 number 70. Whether or not these patterns connect directly to the Watcher's sentence, the repetition of that number across so much of the biblical record suggests something deliberate in how God measures out periods of judgment and restoration, a rhythm that seems to run beneath the surface of the text far more than most readers ever notice. The flood destroyed the bodies of the Nephilim, but Enoch makes a claim here that most Bibles never touch, one that changes everything about how we understand what came after. He writes that when those giant offspring perished in the flood, their bodies died, but something else in them did not. Their spirits remained wandering, homeless, cast out of the physical form they once had, and unable to return to it. Enoch calls them evil spirits upon the earth and says they would continue to afflict, oppress, destroy, and cause trouble, striking men without cause until the final judgment. This is a staggering claim because it suggests the demons described throughout the Gospels, the unclean spirits that Jesus cast out again and again, were not simply abstract evil in some generic sense. They were the disembodied remnant of a rebellion that began on Mount Hermon. Think about how differently the New Testament reads with that in mind. When Jesus encounters the man among the tombs, possessed by a legion of spirits so violent no chain could hold him, and those spirits beg not to be sent into the abyss, that word matters. The abyss, the same bottomless pit Enoch described the watchers being bound within. These spirits knew exactly where obedience to Christ's word would send them, because it was the very place their fathers had already been cast. Luke records their fear plainly, that they begged Jesus not to command them to depart into the deep, not into nothingness, into a specific known place of imprisonment. And this connects to something else Enoch reveals, something that reframes the giants entirely. They didn't vanish from human memory after the flood. Genesis tells us that Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. After. The flood was not the end of this bloodline's presence on earth. It happened again, whether through a second infiltration or through survivors, we're not told, but the giants reappear generations later, and Scripture doesn't hide it or explain it away. Numbers chapter 13 records the 12 spies sent into Canaan coming back trembling, describing the sons of Anak. Giants, they say, came from the Nephilim, men so large that the spies felt like grasshoppers standing beside them, and said so themselves in their own words. This detail alone should stop any casual reader in their tracks. These were not superstitious men prone to exaggeration. These were 12 leaders chosen specifically for their standing among the tribes, sent on a military reconnaissance mission with a clear, practical purpose. Their report wasn't folklore passed down around a fire. It was a strategic assessment delivered to Moses, meant to inform whether the nation could reasonably expect to conquer the land ahead of them. And 10 of those 12 came back so shaken by what they saw that they convinced an entire generation to turn back into the wilderness rather than face it. A decision that cost that generation the promised land entirely and kept them wandering for 40 years until they had all passed away. This wasn't exaggeration born of fear. Deuteronomy backs up the account with detail after detail, describing the Rephaim, a people accounted giants, tall as the Anakim, and mentions Og, king of Bashan, whose bedstead was made of iron, 9 cubits in length. That's over 13 feet. An actual measured object described with the same plain, matter-of-fact tone Scripture uses for census numbers and land boundaries. This wasn't myth-making. This was history, recorded by people who expected their audience to understand exactly what they were reading, because the presence of giants on the land wasn't a legend to them. It was a documented, terrifying reality they had to conquer. Joshua's campaigns weren't only about claiming territory. Read carefully, and you'll notice how often the destruction of giant peoples appears as a specific named objective. The Anakim were cut off from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and Joshua left none remaining in the land of the children of Israel, except that some remained in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod. Remember those 3 cities. Gath. That name will matter again, because centuries later, a giant will step out from that very city onto a battlefield in the valley of Elah, and a shepherd boy with a sling will be the one to finally answer him. Goliath wasn't a random anomaly, a strangely tall soldier born by chance. 1 Samuel places him squarely within this bloodline, describing him as being of the descendants of the giants, from a city Scripture had already marked as a refuge for what remained of the Anakim after Joshua's conquest. His height, over 9 feet by some manuscript traditions, his armor weighing hundreds of shekels, his spear like a weaver's beam, all of it reads like an echo of Og's iron bed, a continuation of the same corrupted bloodline that had been fought since the days of Moses. David didn't just defeat a large man. He confronted one more time, a living remnant of what the Watchers had unleashed on Hermon centuries before, and he did it not with superior strength, but by invoking the name of the God those fallen angels had rebelled against in the first place. This is what makes the Old Testament's war narrative so different once you see them through Enoch's lens. The conquest of Canaan wasn't simple territorial expansion. It carried an undertone of spiritual cleansing, a mission to remove bloodlines and cultures that had been shaped, generations earlier, by beings who had no right to interfere with humanity at all. And it explains something that troubles many readers: the severity of God's instructions concerning certain nations, instructions that read differently when you understand they weren't aimed at ordinary people, but at cultures still carrying the corrupted inheritance of the Watchers' rebellion. The land itself needed to be cleansed the same way the pre-flood world once did, and the pattern set at Hermon kept repeating itself through the generations that followed, resurfacing every time humanity forgot the warning Enoch had been given and carried it as far as he could into a world already turning away from it. What's remarkable is how consistently this thread runs beneath the surface of the entire Old Testament, rarely announced outright, but never fully absent either, as if the writers assumed their readers already understood the stakes. Every mention of the Anakim, every reference to the Rephaim, every oversized weapon or bed frame recorded almost in passing carries the weight of that original rebellion on Hermon. A quiet reminder woven through the historical books that the war humanity was fighting was never only about land or borders. It was about a corruption that refused to stay buried, resurfacing generation after generation until it finally met its match in a shepherd boy who understood exactly whose name he was fighting for. If everything Enoch describes actually happened, you'd expect more than words on a page. You'd expect the ground itself to hold traces of it, and when you start looking at what's actually been dug out of hillsides across the ancient Near East, the silence of mainstream explanation starts to feel less like certainty and more like avoidance. Take Göbekli Tepe, a site in southeastern Turkey that archaeologists initially assumed couldn't be older than a few thousand years because nothing that sophisticated should have existed before settled agriculture, before pottery, before the wheel. Carbon dating told a different story. This site predates the pyramids by roughly 6,000 years, built by people who, according to the conventional timeline, were supposed to still be hunting and gathering in small scattered bands. And yet there they are. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, carved with intricate images of foxes, scorpions, vultures, and serpents, arranged in precise circular enclosures that required organized labor, planning, and engineering knowledge nobody expected hunter-gatherers to possess. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe didn't stumble into this ability. They already had it. And then, just as strangely as it appears in the archaeological record, the site was deliberately buried, filled in with rubble and soil by the very people who built it, as if it needed to be hidden, sealed away from a world that was changing beneath it. Enoch tells us the Watchers taught humanity astronomy, the observation of signs in the stars, knowledge of the sun and moon far beyond what a primitive culture should have organically developed. Göbekli Tepe's pillars appear to align with certain star positions, and some researchers who study its layout believe specific enclosures were oriented toward particular constellations, tracking celestial movement with a level of precision that shouldn't be possible for a culture without writing. That's not proof in the courtroom sense. Nobody carved the Watchers taught us this into the stone, but it is the kind of anomaly that keeps surfacing wherever you look at the earliest chapters of human civilization, technology, and knowledge appearing abruptly, fully formed, without the slow, gradual development we'd expect if humanity built it alone. What makes this even harder to dismiss is the total absence of any earlier stage in the archaeological record. Normally, when researchers uncover an advanced structure, they can trace a progression, simpler tools beneath it, cruder attempts nearby, a visible timeline of trial and error leading up to the finished achievement. Göbekli Tepe has none of that. It appears in the strata already mature, already skilled, with no primitive prototype buried beneath it to explain how the builders got there. It's as though the knowledge arrived rather than developed, dropped into human hands at a level of sophistication that took the rest of the ancient world thousands of years to rediscover on its own. Baalbek in modern Lebanon presents an even more baffling puzzle. Beneath the Roman temple complex built, there sits a foundation of stones so massive that modern engineers still debate how they were quarried, moved, and set into place. The largest stone at the nearby quarry, often called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs over 1,000 tons, and it was never even fully separated from the bedrock. 3 stones already placed in the temple platform, known as the trilithon, weigh roughly 800 tons each, lifted and positioned with a precision that modern cranes would strain to match, using technology the Romans who later built on top of the site didn't themselves possess. Local tradition, recorded even in ancient texts, associated Baalbek with giants, claiming it was built before the flood by beings of extraordinary strength, a tradition so persistent that later writers felt compelled to record it even though they couldn't explain it. Puma Punku, high in the Bolivian Andes, adds another layer to this pattern. The precision cuts in its andesite stone blocks, interlocking with tolerances that rival modern machining, have puzzled researchers for generations. Local Aymara legend claims the site was built in a single night by giants, before a great flood swept through and reshaped the land. Sacsayhuaman, above Cusco in Peru, tells a similar story. Colossal stones fitted together so precisely that not even a blade of grass can slip between the joints. Structures the Inca themselves claimed weren't originally built by their own hands, but inherited from an older, forgotten people. And Tiwanaku, near Puma Punku, carries astronomical alignments and construction techniques that some researchers argue point toward a civilization considerably older than the conventional timeline allows. None of these sites come with a plaque confirming Enoch's account. That's not how ancient history works, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But taken together, a pattern emerges that's difficult to dismiss entirely. Across separate continents, unconnected by any known trade route or shared language, ancient cultures independently preserved the same core memory. Giants, a flood. Knowledge and construction ability that appeared before it should have by the account of the very people who built these places, and then vanished or was deliberately buried in the aftermath of some catastrophic event. Yonaguni, submerged off the coast of Japan, adds one more thread to this same tapestry. Formations beneath the water that some believe are natural and others insist show clear signs of deliberate shaping, terraces and right angles resting on the ocean floor as though an entire structure was swallowed by rising water and never seen again until modern divers found it. Enoch describes a world before the flood filled with knowledge given, not earned, wisdom placed into human hands by beings who had no right to give it, and a civilization that grew far beyond what its moral foundation could support. Whether or not you connect every stone at Baalbek or every pillar at Göbekli Tepe directly to that account, the broader shape of the story keeps repeating itself in the physical remains left behind. Structures too advanced for their supposed era, memories of giants too persistent to be pure invention, and a flood remembered not as local legend, but as a global catastrophe carried in the oral history of cultures who never had the chance to compare notes with one another. Skeptics will point out correctly that correlation isn't proof, that ancient people everywhere told stories of floods and giants because floods and unusually tall individuals were simply part of the human experience across every continent. That's a fair objection, and honesty requires acknowledging it rather than brushing past it, but fairness cuts both ways. The sheer consistency of these accounts, appearing in cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years, each preserving the same basic architecture of memory, deserves more curiosity than modern scholarship has generally been willing to give it. And Enoch's record offers one of the oldest, most detailed frameworks for understanding why that memory might have taken root everywhere at once. Jesus himself pointed back to this exact history when his disciples asked him what signs would mark the end of the age. He didn't describe some entirely new, unprecedented horror. He pointed backward to something they already knew. As the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Not a vague comparison. A direct parallel drawn by Christ himself between the corruption that led to the flood and the conditions that will exist immediately before his return. If the days of Noah involved fallen angels corrupting the human bloodline, spreading violence, and pouring out forbidden knowledge until the earth was filled with corruption, then Jesus was telling his disciples and telling us that something resembling that same pattern would resurface before the end. Revelation picks up this thread and pulls it forward into imagery that echoes Enoch's descriptions almost precisely. John describes a star falling from heaven to earth, given the key to the bottomless pit, opening it to release smoke that darkens the sun, and out of that smoke come locusts with power like scorpions, commanded not to harm the earth, but only those without the seal of God on their foreheads. Their king is named Abaddon in Hebrew, Apollyon in Greek, both words meaning destroyer. This isn't a random insect plague. It's the language of imprisonment, release, and torment aimed specifically at humanity, drawn from the same well of imagery Enoch used to describe the pit where the watchers themselves were bound. The bottomless pit isn't introduced for the first time in Revelation. It's the same abyss that already existed, the same place those demons begged Jesus not to send them during his earthly ministry, and John is shown it opening again, releasing what had been sealed inside. Later in the same book, John describes another figure, a great red dragon, cast out of heaven along with a third of the stars, an image many readers connect to an original angelic rebellion that predates even the Watcher's fall, suggesting layers of angelic betrayal woven through Scripture that most churches never trace out fully. Whether that dragon and the Watchers are the same rebellion or separate ones, the pattern is consistent. Heavenly beings choosing defiance, being cast down, and being reserved for a judgment that unfolds in stages rather than all at once. Revelation doesn't describe one clean, isolated event. It describes a slow unsealing, chapter after chapter, of things that have been waiting far longer than any human generation has existed to witness. This is where the 70 generations becomes more than an interesting detail from an ancient text. It becomes a countdown embedded directly into the structure of biblical prophecy. If the binding was set for a fixed period, ending at the time of final judgment, then the release described in Revelation isn't a separate, unrelated event invented for dramatic effect. It's the fulfillment of a sentence handed down at the very beginning of this story, when Michael and Raphael bound Semjaza and Azazel beneath the earth and were told those chains would hold until Judgment Day finally arrived. Revelation describes that release happening at a specific point during the tribulation, tied directly to trumpet judgments and the unsealing of what had been locked away for millennia. Paul warned Timothy that in the last days perilous times would come when men would be lovers of their own selves, boastful, proud, blasphemers, and he specifically noted that evil men and seducers would grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. That language, seducers growing worse, deception spreading and multiplying, mirrors almost exactly what Enoch describes happening in the pre-flood world once the Watchers began teaching forbidden knowledge, when deception was introduced deliberately and spread faster than righteousness could contain it. Paul also told the Corinthians that Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light, and that his ministers can appear as ministers of righteousness, a warning that carries far more weight when you understand the full context of angelic rebellion Enoch preserved. Beings who once stood in glory now working to counterfeit it. Consider how much of what defines this current age lines up with that ancient warning. Technology advancing faster than wisdom can guide it, much like the weapons and enchantments the Watchers introduced before humanity was ready to bear that knowledge responsibly. Genetic manipulation, artificial intelligence, and scientific ambition, pushing boundaries that some researchers openly compare to the corruption of bloodlines described in Genesis 6, blurring lines between human and something else entirely. Violence saturating culture at a scale that would have been unthinkable a century ago. None of this proves the exact timeline Enoch measured out, and it would be irresponsible to claim certainty about dates Scripture itself doesn't spell out plainly. But the pattern Christ warned his disciples to watch for, the days of Noah returning, doesn't require guesswork about specific years. It requires recognizing a shape, a fingerprint, and that fingerprint is becoming harder and harder to ignore the longer this age continues. There's also the matter of how casually this history has been treated by institutions that once took it seriously. Early church writers like Tertullian and even Irenaeus referenced Enoch's account with respect, treating the Watchers as established background to the flood narrative rather than fringe speculation. It was only centuries later, as councils debated which texts belonged in the canon, that Enoch was set aside, not because its content was disproven, but because questions arose about its authorship and transmission. Jude, quoting it directly by name as prophecy, complicates any attempt to dismiss it entirely and leaves modern readers with an uncomfortable question. Why did the church stop teaching something the apostles themselves clearly trusted enough to cite as truth? The Watchers are still there, beneath whatever this earth actually is, still bound the way Enoch saw them bound, still waiting the way Isaiah and Jude and Peter all confirmed independently, centuries apart, without needing to coordinate their testimony. Scripture doesn't leave room for casual dismissal of this account as fringe mythology. It's referenced, confirmed, and built upon by multiple inspired writers who treated it as established history, not speculation. And if their testimony holds, if the chains Enoch witnessed really were set on a countdown, then whatever generation finally sees those chains loosen will not be facing something new. They'll be facing the return of something ancient, something that has been waiting in darkness since before the flood. For the exact moment prophecy said it would finally be released, a moment Scripture insists will not arrive unnoticed, but will announce itself through signs discerning believers have been told plainly to watch for. Enoch was shown that prison so someone would remember it, and now you carry that memory too. What he witnessed beneath the earth, the chains, the countdown, the warning Christ himself echoed centuries later, was never meant to stay buried in a text most churches set aside. If this history moved something in you, the full account, illustrated and laid out in detail, is waiting in the Forbidden Book of Enoch, linked in the first comment below. Thank you for staying with this one all the way through. If it opened your eyes to something Scripture has been holding all along, subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments what part struck you the hardest. There's more waiting on the screen right now, so stay close.